Part 1, Chapter 3, East Room of the Temple. Having mounted the first steps upon the path, the aspirant stands in front of the veil which hangs before the mystic temple. Drawing this aside, he enters into the east room of the sanctuary, which was called the holy place. No window or opening of any sort was provided in the tabernacle to let in the light of day, but this room was never dark. Night and day it was brightly illuminated by burning lamps. Its furniture was symbolical of the methods whereby the aspirant may make soul growth by service. This furniture consisted of three principal articles: the altar of incense, the table of showbread, and the golden candlestick from which the light proceeded. It was not allowable for the common Israelite to enter the sacred apartment and behold the furniture. No one but a priest might enter the outer veil and go in even as far as this first room. The golden candlestick was placed on the south side of the holy place, so as to be to the left of any person who stood in the middle of the room. It was made entirely of pure gold and consisted of a shaft of principal stem rising upright from a base, together with 6 branches. These branches started at 3 different points on the stem and curved upward in 3 partial circles of varying diameter, symbolizing the 3 periods of development: Saturn, Sun, and Moon periods, which man went through before the Earth period, which was not half spent. This latter period was signified by the 7th light. Each of these 7 branches terminated in a lamp, and these lamps were supplied with the purest olive oil, which was made by a special process. The priests were required to take care that the candlestick was never without a light. Every day the lamps were examined, dressed, and supplied with oil so that they might burn perpetually. The table of showbread was placed on the north side of the apartment so as to be on the right-hand side of the priest when he walked up toward the second veil. 12 loaves of unleavened bread were continually kept upon this table. They were placed in 2 piles, one loaf upon the other, and on top of each pile there was a small quantity of frankincense. These loaves were called showbread, or bread of the face, because they were set solemnly forth before the presence of the Lord, who dwelt in the Shekinah glory behind the second veil. Every Sabbath day these loaves were changed by the priest, the old ones being taken away and the new ones put in their place. The bread that was taken away was given to the priest to eat, and no one else was allowed to taste it. Neither were they suffered to eat it anywhere else except within the court of the sanctuary, because it was most holy, and therefore might only be taken by sacred persons upon holy ground. The incense that was upon the 2 piles of showbread was burned when the bread was changed as an offering by fire unto the Lord for a memorial instead of the bread. The altar of incense, or the golden altar, was the 3rd article of furniture in the east room of the temple. It was situated in the center of the room, that is to say, halfway between the north and the south walls in front of the second veil. No flesh was ever burned upon this altar, nor was it ever touched with blood, except on the most solemn occasions, and then its horns alone were marked by the crimson stain. The smoke that arose from its top was never any other than the smoke of burning incense. This went up every morning and evening, filling the sanctuary with a fragrant cloud and sending a refreshing odor out through all the courts and far over the country on every side for miles beyond. Because incense was thus burned every day, it was called a perpetual incense before the Lord. It was not simple frankincense which was burned, but a compound of this with other sweet spices, made according to the direction of Jehovah for this special purpose, and so considered holy, such as no man was allowed to make like unto for common use. The priest was charged never to offer strange incense on the golden altar, that is, any other than the sacred composition. This altar was placed directly before the veil on the outside of it, but before the mercy seat, which was within the second veil. For though he that ministered at the altar of incense could not see the mercy seat because of the interposing veil, yet he must look toward it and direct his incense that way. And it was customary when the cloud of fragrant incense rose above the temple for all the people who were standing without in the court of the sanctuary to send up their prayers to God, each one silently by himself. The mystic significance of the East Room and its furniture. The golden candlestick. As previously said, when the priest stood in the center of the East Room of the tabernacle, the seven-branched candlestick was on his left towards the south. This was symbolical of the fact that the seven light givers, or planets, which tread the mystic circle dance around the central orb, the sun, travel in the narrow belt comprising 8 degrees on either side of the sun's path, which is called the zodiac. God is light, and the 7 spirits before the throne are God's ministers. Therefore, they are also messengers of light to humanity. Furthermore, as the heavens are ablaze with the light when the moon in its phases arrives at the full in the eastern part of the heavens, so also the east room of the tabernacle was filled with light, indicating visibly the presence there of God and his 7 ministers, the star angels. We may note in passing the light of the golden candlestick, which was clear and the flame odorless, and compare it with the smoke-filled enveloped flame on the altar of burnt offerings, which in a certain sense generated darkness rather than dispelled it. But there is a still deeper and more sublime meaning in this fire symbol, which we will not take up for discussion until we come to the Shekinah glory, whose dazzling brilliance hovered over the mercy seat in the west room. Before we can enter into this subject, we must understand all the symbols that lie between the golden candlestick and that sublime Father fire, which was the crowning glory of the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the tabernacle in the wilderness. The table of showbread. The east room of the temple may be called the hall of service, for it corresponds to the 3 years' ministry of Christ and contains all the paraphernalia for soul growth, though, as said, furnished with only 3 principal articles. Among the chief of these is the table of showbread. Upon this table, as we have already seen, there were 2 piles of showbread, each containing 6 loaves, and upon the top of each pile there was a little heap of frankincense. The aspirant who came to the temple door, poor, naked, and blind, has since been brought to the light of the 7-branched candlestick, obtaining a certain amount of cosmic knowledge, and this he is required to use in the service of his fellow men. The table of showbread represents this in symbol. The grain from which the showbread was made had originally been given by God, and then it was planted by mankind, who had previously plowed and tilled the soil. After planting their grain, they must cultivate and water it. Then, when the grain had borne fruit, according to the nature of the soul and the care bestowed upon it, it had to be harvested, threshed, ground, and baked. Then the ancient servants of God had to carry it into the temple, where it was placed before the Lord as bread to show that they had performed their toil and rendered the necessary service. The God-given grains of wheat in the 12 loaves represent the opportunities for soul growth given by God, which come to all through the 12 departments of life, represented by the 12 houses of the horoscope, under the dominion of the 12 divine hierarchies known through the signs of the zodiac. But it is the task of the mystic mason, the true temple builder, to embrace these opportunities, to cultivate and nourish them, so that he may reap therefrom the living bread which nurtures the soul. We do not, however, assimilate our physical food in toto. There is a residue, a large portion of ash, left after we have amalgamated the quintessence into our system. Similarly, the showbread was not burned or consumed before the Lord, but 2 small heaps of frankincense were placed on the 2 stacks of showbread, one on each pile. This was conceived to be the aroma thereof, and was later burned on the altar of incense. Likewise, the soul substance of service gathered daily by the ardent mystic mason is thrown into the mill of retrospection at eventide, when he retires to his couch and performs there the scientific exercises given by the elder brothers of the Rose Cross. There is a time each month which is particularly propitious for extracting the frankincense of soul growth and burning it before the Lord, so that it may be a sweet savor to be amalgamated with the soul body and form part of that golden, radiant wedding garment. This is the time when the moon is full. Then she is in the east, and the heavens are ablaze with light, as was in the east room of the ancient Atlantean mystery temple, where the priest garnered the pabulum of the soul, symbolized by the showbread and the fragrant essence, which delighted our Father then as now. Let the mystic mason take particular note, however, that the loaves of showbread were not the musings of dreamers. They were not the product of speculation upon the nature of God or light. They were the product of actual toil, of orderly, systematic work, and it behooves us to follow the path of actual service if we would garner treasure in heaven. Unless we really work and serve humanity, we shall have nothing to bring, no bread to show at the feast of the full moon and at the mystic marriage of the higher to the lower self. We shall find ourselves minus the radiant golden soul body, the mystic wedding garment without which the union with Christ can never be consummated. The altar of incense. At the altar of incense, as we saw in the general description of the tabernacle and its furniture, incense was offered before the Lord continually, and the priest who stood before the altar ministering was at that time looking toward the mercy seat over the ark, though it was impossible for him to see because of the second veil which was interposed between the first and second apartments of the tabernacle, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. We have also seen in the consideration of the showbread that incense symbolizes the extract, the aroma of the service we have rendered according to our opportunities. And just as the sacrificial animal upon the brazen altar represents the deeds of wrongdoing committed during the day, so the incense burned upon the golden altar, which is a sweet savor to the Lord, represents the virtuous deeds of our lives.